little subject, little wit. Namby-pamby is your guide, Albion's joy, Hibernia's pride. Namby-pamby is basically referring to Phillips by name, giving him a nickname. And this is like seemingly one of the first examples, I think, of, I mean, this is Donald Trump on Twitter calling Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. You're someone mocking you and giving you a crappy nickname. And this nickname actually stuck. So that, basically for the rest of his life, this guy, Phillips was called by Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope. He was referred to as namby-pamby for the rest of his life, simply because he used seven syllables in his poem. Like, okay, that's a weird thing to be critical of, but whatever.
That's a rough road.
Yeah,
that's a rough road.
So from using 7 syllables to being effeminate, that's how this has evolved over 300 years.
All right.
There you go. Way more than you ever could possibly want to know.
Well, it certainly fits in with the I don't know. There's a lot of I could see that. I mean, I thought of Jonathan Swift almost immediately when you brought that up, but it's it's mean spirited and it's
right.
Yeah, kind of it's got some stank on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, right. how during the days of when septicemia is a thing, how do you have time to be this petty? But whatever.
Concentrate on keeping your teeth in your head, please.
Exactly right. Wash your hands.
Yeah. Wash your hands. Brush your teeth. Take a bath, for God's sake.
Leave each other alone, for Christ's sake.
Stop burning people at the stake. Just come on.
Right. Okay. So for my story, we're gonna talk about. We'll see what you think about this. We're going to be talking about a gentleman named Charles Vance Miller. I think it's pronounced Miller, Millar. Does that name ring a bell with you at all?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So Charles Vance Miller, he's born June 28, 1854. And this is one of those rare individuals that winds up gaining notoriety and name recognition really only in death, or mostly in death. So he was Canadian. He was an attorney. Apparently had just a wildly successful career. Invested quite a bit in a number of businesses, and became quite wealthy during the course of his life with investments and with his law practice, mostly in Ontario, mostly in Toronto. And so on October 31st, 1926, is when he passes away. And I guess it is 100 years ago, and so it seems peculiar that they wouldn't know what killed him. One account I read says that he suffered a fatal heart attack while running up some stairs. A second summary says that he had a stroke in his office while meeting with some associates discussing a case. Either way, he died on October 31st, 1926. He did it, he was single for his entire life, never married, never had any children. He had apparently one pretty serious relationship when he was a fairly young man. She was a member of some prominent family. She dumped his ass, and he basically decided he was going to stay single for the rest of his life and focus his life completely on his career. He was known in Toronto, this would be hard, known throughout his life to sleep on the veranda of his house to, quote, keep himself hard, unquote. In January in Toronto, that would be difficult.
That's balmy. Yeah.
Yeah. He
it's okay because they measure in Celsius, so it's
right. It's much easier to right, exactly. So by the time he passed away, he'd amassed a fortune of $750,000, which is around $12 million today. But for some reason, didn't give any money to charity that anyone was aware of during his life at all. But he did enjoy a joke, enjoyed pulling pranks. And frankly, I mean, you'll have to tell me what you think at the end. I can't quite tell whether I like this guy or not, because he definitely kind of seems a little bit like a gigantic dick. But some aspects of his life seems a little bit tongue in cheek and sort of, kind of funny. He would apparently, when he was walking around in public, he would amuse himself. I'm not sure whether it was a dollar bill or I know that Canada very actively used, I think, $1 coins and maybe even a $2 coin.
The toonie.
Yeah, either way, he would leave, drop money on the street and then hide and wait until someone spotted it. And then he kind of had gained pleasure from watching their sense of joy in finding money, which is, I'm not sure whether that's kind of cute or whether that's sort of weirdly, I don't know, sadistic, but apparently it was known for doing that all the time. He was president and at least part owner of a Toronto brewery called the O'Keefe Brewery. He was big into gambling. He owned racehorses, belonged to the Ontario Jockey Club. And so he never married, as I said, essentially had no close relatives either. And this one article said, Miller constructed a will that was both whimsical and mischievous. He parceled out much of his estate to test his theory that every person had a price and made sure the will would stand up to any and all legal challenges. And then Miller wrote of himself as well, this will is necessarily uncommon and capricious because I have no dependents or near relations and no duty rests upon me to leave any property at my death. And what I do leave is proof of my folly in gathering and retaining more than I required in my lifetime. So he definitely kind of pulled a few, either jokes or fuck yous, depending on how you want to look at it. He owned several properties, I judged, around the world. He left a Jamaican vacation spot, a property he owned, to three other attorneys in Toronto. These three men were known to despise each other, and he left it to the three of them, but they had to basically have shared tenancy of this property. He was, he liked to screw with teetotalers, and when he died, he left shares of the brewery to a couple of folks that were teetotalers. The jockey club he was a member of was, like all jockey clubs everywhere. It's nothing but, the rich and the affluent, etc. But there was one member of this club apparently that folks had a dim view of. The articles didn't really say why, because if you're wealthy enough to be in there, I don't know. But there's one character there that was deemed to be unsavory and quote repellent unquote. So Miller left his shares in the club to that person, just to screw with the other membership, and two other shares in the jockey club he gave to two other prominent Canadians who were rabid opponents of racetrack gambling, just to mess with them. So
turns out that the guy they didn't like was really tall. We can't have you in the jockey club, sir.
Right. So no horses for you. So in his will, though, apparently clause 9 of his will was the one that caused the most, I don't know, stress. And it was, quote, the legacy that triggered a race to conceive. So the media went nuts on this, and they called it the Toronto Stork Derby. You're familiar with this, I think.
This is ringing a bell. Yeah.
Okay. So clause 9 is the provision in his will. So Snopes on Snopes.com described it. Simply put, he directed the residue of his estate to be given to the Toronto mother who gave birth to the most children in 10 years immediately following his death. So you can view this as being charitable. You can view this as being kind. Maybe it's not really given to a charity per se, but you'll hear the rest of this, and you can. It's definitely a mixed blessing. It was a tidy sum of money, $750,000. So $12 million in today's money. And he died in 26. So it seems pretty clear from his from records and from the manner in which he invested money that he was probably suspicious of the fact that the Depression was coming. And maybe his motivation in doing this was good, but it's definitely hard to know for sure. The media definitely loved it. This contest, was definitely kind of a distraction from a lot of news that was not great. Pretty grim, in general, in most respects. And so basically, there was a judge involved, and they had to really monitor. Really, this had to be a regimented and sort of formalized contest. A start date and an end date, which was his death date, Halloween, 10 years later, and over time it became clear that there were sort of 5 women leading the pack in this contest, and they were just spitting out kids left and right. By 1933, the 5 with quote the most fruitful wombs had delivered 56 kids among them, but only 32 had been born during that window, and many of these mothers had actually already had children before the contest began. So I'm sorry, heading into the Depression era, this is not smart. But as the contest progressed over time, interest only grew, and there was media coverage apparently worldwide. The time as they got closer to the end of the contest, it was a blurb was written up in Time magazine. So Christmas Eve of 34, last week in Toronto, each of the 2 leading contenders for the prize money bore a child. Miss Frances Lillian Kenny, 31, gave birth to a girl, her 11th child since the race began. Mrs. Grace Spagnato, 41, gave birth to a boy, her 9th. Everyone was paying very, very close attention to it. The provincial government for Ontario was monitoring this, and they were not pleased. They called it a racket, and quote, the most revolting and disgusting exhibition ever put on in a civilized country. And so the contest proceeds. Midnight on Halloween 1936 was the deadline for baby production. Apparently, one woman gave birth right very, very close to the deadline, but missed the deadline. Kid was born on November 1st or 2nd. Just very, very, just missed the deadline. That mother, Grace Bagnato, was disqualified after the fact, because, as I've said to you before, every story in history is also the story about racism. So Grace Bagnato was disqualified because her husband was Italian.
Oh,
so Italian babies are not babies, I guess. No idea. One other contestant. This just makes me laugh. Who had 10 births to her credit, was also tossed out of the event because 2 of them had been stillborns.
I was going to ask if that would count against the total. So stillborns don't count. And then a woman named Pauline Clark gave birth 10 times, but babies conceived out of wedlock also don't count. So so you have to be all your babies, they have to stay alive, and they have to have the same father. And they can't be Italian.
Right. Or I'm sure any other race besides,
right.
Assholes. So Bagnato, who's married to the Italian, got nothing. There were 4 winners at the end of the contest: Annie Smith, Alice Timleck, Kathleen Nagel, and Isabel McLean. Also, all received $125,000, which is around $2 million in today's money, which is not bad. That's about it. A couple sort of epilogues here. One of the challenges to his will in the Canadian Encyclopedia, the question of whether Millar intended his will the question of whether Miller intended his will to take effect or merely to amuse his lawyer friends remains in doubt. There was some dispute whether or not this was just a big joke, and whether they should really take it seriously or not when they first read it, and they didn't know whether the whole purpose was to just tie the legal system up into knots, or whether they really should proceed with it.
Or if some paralegal made a really bad mistake.
Right. The government apparently